Discovering a betrayal is a punch in the gut that takes your breath away, but realizing that it was happening under your eyes, disguised as a normal life, is something that consumes you inside. I was there, living what I believed to be a stable marriage, a predictable routine. Love, over time, had lost its shine, but it was still there, or at least that's what I thought. Until one day, everything changed. Small details, attitudes that I ignored or justified, began to align themselves into a plot that I never thought possible. Betrayal. The word became real in a way I never wanted to believe. And the worst part, she was going to parties. Hidden parties. And me, meanwhile, here, living a lie. Confirmation came when, one night, I decided to follow in her footsteps. The usual excuse, work meeting, I'll be back late. The same phrase that I heard so many times without realizing what was behind it. She said she needed that time, that the work was demanding a lot from her, that I wouldn't understand. And I, blind, believed. But something inside me screamed, begged me not to ignore the signs. I grabbed the car keys and followed his trail, a mixture of anger, fear and excitement overwhelming me as I drove. Upon arrival, the shock. It was a party I would never have imagined she would attend. Loud music, laughter, expensive drinks. What I saw left me paralyzed for a few seconds, my heart was pounding. She was there, laughing, dancing, having fun as if there were no cares in the world. As if there wasn't a husband waiting for her at home. Everything I had built together was falling apart before my eyes. But I wasn't just going to watch from afar. Not this time. I decided it would be her last night playing with me. It was my turn to change the game. I picked up my cell phone, my shaking hands could barely hold the device, but I needed to register. Every laugh, every touch she had with that man, every detail that revealed the truth she hid so much. A truth that I would throw in your face in front of everyone. I wanted her to feel what I was feeling. I wanted every bit of that betrayal to be seen by her, just as I was seeing it. And then, I would end it all. Time seemed to slow down as I approached the door. Each step closer, heavier. The voices became clearer, the laughter louder, like a taunt, a knife that twisted deeper into my chest. When I finally entered, the noise, the lights, everything seemed like a surreal scene. And she, so carefree, looked at me, but didn't see me. I was so caught up in that lie that I didn't even notice my presence. It was as if I were a ghost in our own story. I approached her without fuss, almost calmly. The adrenaline, however, was boiling inside me. My hands were sweating, my head was throbbing, but my goal was clear. The shock on his face when he finally saw me was something I will never forget. His eyes wide, mouth opening, but speechless. She knew. He knew that whatever he tried to say would be useless. And then, before I could stammer out any lame excuses, I said, he finished. I said with a firmness I didn't even know I had. A dead silence took over the surroundings. The eyes started to turn to us, but I didn't care. That scene was mine, and she would pay the price for everything she did. She tried to get closer, tried to speak, but I interrupted her. All this finished. And that's when I showed her what she never expected, the video. At that moment, it wasn't just a betrayal that she was hiding, it was her image, her life exposed in front of everyone who was there. The humiliation was palpable in the air. His expression of panic, of shame, was what I was looking for. It wasn't enough to end everything there, I wanted her to feel the weight of betrayal like a chain that she would never be able to let go of. The crowd watched in absolute silence, some whispers spread, but no one had the courage to intervene. She, once confident, fell apart there, in front of me, and I just watched, feeling a strange satisfaction mixed with the emptiness that was already beginning to form. What was left after that? But the story doesn't end here. What I didn't know that night was that this public humiliation would be just the beginning of a series of events that would change my life forever. Something inside her, something I hadn't anticipated, was yet to come. Something that would transform the way I viewed justice, revenge, and truly overcoming betrayal. What comes after destroying the person who destroyed you? Welcome to our channel, where we never support any type of betrayal. The stories you will hear here are fictional, but the lesson is real. Betrayal corrodes lives, destroys families, and leaves deep scars. Get ready to dive into an intense and surprising story. Now, relax, because you're about to hear a shocking story that will hold your attention until the last second. Good story. Boston had always been the ideal setting for Ethan and Olivia's lives. Married for almost 10 years, they lived in a spacious house in one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the city. Their marriage, in the eyes of outsiders, was enviable. He is a respected lawyer, known for his determination and unwavering ethics. She is a successful, charismatic and admired marketer by everyone. Together, they seem to be the perfect couple, a solid partnership, built over years of complicity and mutual growth. Ethan had always been a dedicated man. Coming from a simple family, he struggled to achieve the success he had. Each victory in his career was a step towards providing a better life for his wife, the woman with whom he had been madly in love since their first meeting. Olivia was his balance, his strength amid the turmoil of work and responsibilities. He used to say that his life only made sense because she was by his side. Olivia was a free-spirited, intelligent and ambitious woman. Her career was flourishing at one of the city's largest marketing agencies, and despite the long hours, she always found time to maintain the appearance of a happy marriage. For her, Ethan was the ideal man, attentive, patient and trustworthy. Even with her own professional ambitions, Olivia found marriage to be a safe haven, a place where she could be herself without reservation. However, like many couples facing the passing years, things began to subtly change. There were no big fights or heated arguments. In fact, it was the silence that hurt most. Ethan was increasingly involved in his work, taking complex cases and dedicating his time and energy to acquiring new clients. The law firm where he worked had promoted him to partner, which made him dive even deeper into his commitments. At first, Olivia understood. She knew that this promotion meant a lot to him and that hard work had always been an admirable characteristic of her husband. But, over time, emotional detachment began to manifest itself. What used to be a routine of quiet dinners and conversations about everyday life has become a void of silences filled with the noise of the television or the clicks on cell phones. Ethan arrived late, too tired to do anything other than lie down and sleep. Olivia, in turn, had also been involved in a large project at the company, which required constant travel and meetings. Communication between them weakened little by little, and although they both felt the growing distance, neither seemed willing to break the cycle. Close friends, those who had known the couple since the beginning, began to notice that something was different. At parties and social gatherings, Ethan and Olivia no longer seemed as connected as they once were. There were vacant looks, gestures that were once natural, like holding hands or exchanging smiles, were now rare. The routine had consumed them, and they both seemed to be living in their own bubbles, distant but still maintaining the appearance of a stable marriage. Ethan, in his introspective nature, began to notice something was out of place. He missed the intimacy he used to share with Olivia, but at the same time, he didn't know how to reverse that situation. Their attempts at getting closer were often frustrated by mutual exhaustion or by commitments that always seemed more urgent than any emotional reconnection. On several nights, he would find himself looking at her as she slept, trying to understand where they had gotten lost. The love was still there, but wrapped in a layer of misunderstanding and distance. Olivia, on the other hand, tried not to think about it so much. She had always been a practical and determined woman, and focusing on work seemed like the best way to avoid the growing discomfort she felt at home. Business trips and company events distracted her, and she allowed herself to immerse herself in her professional routine as a way to escape what was happening in her marriage. It wasn't that she didn't love Ethan, she did. But something inside her was also changing, and she didn't know how to deal with it. Sometimes, when she was alone, she wondered if this was just a phase, or if she was really losing her connection with him. But no matter how much they tried to avoid it, there were times when reality forced them to confront their feelings. Like that Sunday afternoon, when they both decided to take some time to walk in the park. The day was beautiful, the autumn leaves fell softly from the trees, and the climate invited the tranquility that they both needed. They walked side by side, but in silence, each immersed in their own thoughts. At one point, Ethan, trying to break the barrier that had formed between them, commented on how he missed those moments, on how things had changed. "We used to do this more often," he said, his voice low but carrying a weight that she immediately noticed. "It seems like we no longer have time for each other." Olivia stopped walking and looked at him. There was something in Ethan's eyes that made her chest tighten. He was trying, and she knew it. But she also knew it wasn't that simple. "I know," he replied, with a sigh. "The work, the rush, it seems like things have gotten out of our control." But, she hesitated, not knowing how to complete the sentence. The silence between them was once again interrupted by the noise of the park around them, but at that moment, something became clear. There was a gap, a distance that they needed to overcome, but neither of them knew where to start. As the days passed, the distance between them deepened. Ethan threw himself even more into his work, trying to compensate for his emotional emptiness with the demands of his professional life. Olivia, in turn, continued to dedicate herself to the company's projects, although something inside her also began to change in a subtle but significant way. Weeks turned into months, and what was once a small rift in the relationship now felt like an abyss. Ethan, despite feeling the weight of this distance, didn't know how to reconnect with Olivia. He partly blamed himself for the separation, believing that if he had balanced his work and personal life better, maybe things wouldn't be the way they were. But the reality was more complicated than he imagined. Sometimes he found himself wondering if this was the beginning of the end, but he quickly dismissed the idea, unable to deal with the possibility of losing the woman he loved so much. Olivia, on the other hand, was beginning to question what she really wanted. Work, which used to be a distraction, now didn't fill the emptiness she felt. She found herself at a crossroads, torn between the love she knew still existed for Ethan and the feeling that something was missing, something she couldn't fully identify. Their lives, which were once a narrative of success and complicity, now seemed like a story of silences and increasing distances. And while they both tried, in their own way, to deal with what was happening, they didn't know that the choices they were about to make would change their lives forever. What would happen to Ethan and Olivia was yet to be revealed. But one thing was certain, the road ahead would be full of unexpected twists and turns. The weeks dragged by like an endless winter. Ethan felt the weight of time on his shoulders, the routine increasingly lonely. He and Olivia no longer talked about their marriage, as if they had both made a silent pact to ignore what was slowly falling apart. The nights were filled with quick dinners, followed by prolonged silences that Ethan tried, in vain, to break with trivial conversations. Olivia responded, but always with a distant look, as if she were somewhere else. And maybe he was. He noticed the changes, of course. How not to notice? Olivia came home later and later, and when she did, she avoided talking about the day. She claimed to be exhausted, overwhelmed by new projects, but there was something more. Something Ethan couldn't name, but it was there, choking the air between them. He tried to rationalize, to tell himself it was just a phase, that their work was all-consuming. However, no matter how much he tried to push away the doubt, it became impossible to ignore. One day, as Ethan was preparing for another meeting at the office, something in Olivia's behavior caught his attention. She hurried out of the house, barely exchanging words with him, but the detail that bothered him was the way she looked at her phone before leaving, a quick smile that she tried to hide. It wasn't the behavior of someone who was simply late for work. There was something more to that rush, something that set off an alarm inside Ethan. In the following weeks, this uneasiness grew. Ethan began to notice Olivia's frequent departures at night, always with vague excuses. Last-minute meetings, company events, something that didn't seem to make sense with how she used to manage her time. And most alarmingly, she was physically pulling away. His rare attempts to approach were met with apologies, as if an invisible barrier had been erected between them. One day, while Ethan was organizing papers in his home office, Olivia's cell phone vibrated on the table next to him. She had forgotten her device when she left, and the screen was flashing with a notification. He hesitated. It wasn't like him to invade Olivia's privacy, but the feeling that something was wrong was eating away at him. His fingers moved almost on impulse, and he unlocked the phone. What he saw was not a work message, as he expected, but an exchange of messages with someone he didn't recognize. The words were too friendly, too intimate. Ethan's blood ran cold. He scrolled through the conversation, and what he read confirmed his worst fears. They were short but clear messages. There were scheduled meetings, references to moments together that he never knew happened. Each line was a blow, a revelation that made him question everything he thought he knew about marriage. The pieces of the puzzle finally came together, and the image formed was devastating. In the days that followed, Ethan became a spectator of his own life, observing Olivia with different eyes. He hasn't confronted it directly, not yet. I wanted to understand what was happening, I wanted to know how far it had gone. Her every gesture seemed loaded with ulterior motives. The exits, the quick smiles at the cell phone, the excuses. All of this pushed him into an abyss of doubts and anguish. Ethan couldn't sleep at night, the sound of silence next to him tortured him. The woman who slept so close now seemed to be in a completely different world from him. Until, one night, the opportunity he wasn't expecting appeared. Olivia, once again, said she needed to leave for a work commitment. Ethan observed every detail, the way she groomed herself more carefully than usual, how she avoided looking directly at him, how she held her cell phone more firmly than necessary. When she left, he decided it was time to act. This time, Ethan followed Olivia. His heart hammered in his chest as he drove through the city, keeping a safe distance. The path did not take him to an office or some formal event. When her car parked in a more remote neighborhood, Ethan already knew his instincts were correct. He parked a little further away, far enough away to not be noticed, and saw Olivia get out of the car, checking her watch with an expression he no longer recognized. She entered an inconspicuous building, and Ethan, still hesitant, decided to wait. Every minute seemed like an eternity, and his mind filled with scenarios of what could be happening inside. Eyes fixed on the entrance, he wondered if he would be able to face the truth when it emerged. But something inside him knew that the truth, however painful, needed to be discovered. 40 minutes passed before Olivia came out again, accompanied. Ethan saw her smiling, talking to a man he had never seen before. They walked side by side, too close to be just colleagues. Ethan's blood boiled. All the anger he had been holding back finally came to the surface. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to control the urge to get out of the car and confront them right then. But he knew it wasn't the time yet. Ethan discreetly followed them to a restaurant, where the two entered as if they were any other couple. They sat near the window, and Ethan could see them from afar, the intimacy between them evident in every gesture, in every look. Ethan's heart beat heavy as he observed what he already knew but refused to accept until that moment. The betrayal was there, in front of him, finally exposed. The pain Ethan felt watching Olivia and that man inside the restaurant was unbearable. Every second that passed was a deeper stab. Her smile, which was once his alone, was now offered to someone else. Ethan remained at a distance, leaning over the steering wheel of the car, feeling his chest tighten, anger boiling, but also a feeling of impotence taking over him. How had this happened? At what point had he lost Olivia to someone else? But he needed to act. Leaving them there, in public, enjoying the night as if nothing was happening, was unbearable. He had already decided. It would end that night. He took out his cell phone and checked the video he had recorded earlier once again. That record not only showed the meeting, but every touch, every look that confirmed what he already feared: Olivia was cheating on him. He wasn't just going to confront her, he wasn't just going to end the marriage there. Ethan wanted the weight of that betrayal to hit her like an avalanche. And the world would know. Ethan got out of the car, fueled by adrenaline. He entered the restaurant with steady steps, but his mind felt like a whirlwind. His hands were sweaty, his mouth was dry, and he felt like the floor could collapse at any moment beneath his feet. When his eyes finally found Olivia, sitting there, distracted, laughing carelessly, he knew there was no going back. Olivia. His voice cut through the ambient sound, icy and filled with a coldness that she didn't immediately recognize. She lifted her head, her eyes wide, her expression of surprise quickly turning to panic. The man next to her looked confused, not understanding Ethan's presence there, but it was Olivia's silence that gave everything away. She knew. At that moment, everything became clear. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" He held her gaze firmly, feeling the anger pulsing within him, but keeping himself controlled. This was the moment. There would be no shouting or scandals. He needed to be clear, precise. He pulled a chair from the table next to him and sat down, crossing his arms, facing both Olivia and the unknown man. "What am I doing here?" he repeated, his voice low but full of irony. "I think that's the question I should ask you, Olivia. What are you doing here?" The man next to her began to shift uncomfortably in his chair. He looked at Olivia, waiting for an explanation, but she remained silent, caught between fear and guilt. Ethan looked at the man for a moment and turned back to Olivia. "It's funny," he continued, as if he was trying to hold back a bitter laugh, "because until a few weeks ago, I thought our marriage was just going through a phase. A difficult phase, of course, but nothing we couldn't overcome. I thought you were busy with work, with projects, that you just needed time." He paused, staring at her. "But now I know it was something very different." The silence that followed was crushing. Olivia opened her mouth, trying to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. She knew that any attempt to justify it would be in vain. Ethan already knew too much. "You know, Olivia, that I've always trusted you. I always believed that despite any problems we had, you would be honest with me. But you betrayed me. And not only did he cheat, but he did it to someone," he looked at the man again, with contempt. "Someone who doesn't even have the decency to face this head-on." The man finally spoke, trying to maintain his composure. "I think you're exaggerating, friend. Olivia and I were just, what were they just?" Ethan interrupted him, his voice now filled with contained anger. "Friends? It's not an exaggeration when you destroy years of trust, when you sleep with the woman who promised to be loyal to you." The tension between them was almost palpable. Olivia finally tried to intervene. "Ethan, please, can we talk about this? It's not what you're thinking, isn't that what I'm thinking?" Ethan let out a sarcastic laugh, leaning over the table, his eyes boring into hers. "So tell me, Olivia, what exactly and?" "Because I would really love to hear your version of events." She lowered her head, unable to meet his gaze. Her silence said more than any words could. And that's when Ethan knew what he needed to do. With a quick movement, he took his cell phone out of his pocket and, before either of them could react, he pressed play. The video began to play on the screen, the sound of their laughter filling the room. Ethan had filmed them moments before entering the restaurant, recording every detail of the meeting, every knowing smile, every touch. He let the video play for a few seconds, long enough for both of them to understand what was happening. Olivia went pale. The man next to him shifted uncomfortably, but had nothing to say. Ethan, in turn, watched them coldly, waiting for the consequences of that moment to begin to unfold. "I could have kept this to myself," he said, turning off the video, but without putting away his cell phone. It could have ended everything here, at this table, with just the three of us knowing the truth. But you know what I noticed, Olivia? His voice was calm, but cutting. You don't deserve this. You don't deserve me to be so discreet. Her eyes filled with tears, but she knew there was nothing left to do. Ethan, please, don't do this. Don't do what? He got up from the table, putting his cell phone in his pocket with a determined look. Expose you. Show everyone who you really are. You know, Olivia, I spent too much time being the good husband, the one who always tried to understand, the one who was always willing to forgive. But this, he paused, looking at her with contempt. This is unforgivable. He walked away from the table, but before leaving, he turned around one last time. It's all over. And with those words, he left the restaurant, leaving Olivia and her lover paralyzed, not knowing what would come next. But Ethan already knew. He had made up his mind from the moment he discovered the betrayal. It wouldn't end there. That night, as he drove through the streets, Ethan's heart felt heavy, but a strange sense of relief was beginning to emerge. Everything he knew, everything he built, was now in ruins, but he no longer cared. What came next, for him, was not just the end of the marriage, but the revelation of something greater. Something that would destroy Olivia once and for all. The secret, kept until that moment, was now ready to be revealed. The feeling of emptiness that came over Ethan after leaving the restaurant was unbearable. Every step I took towards the car seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime of disappointments, broken promises and shattered dreams. He had done what needed to be done, exposed Olivia, confronted her betrayal, and yet the relief he expected to feel hadn't come. On the contrary, the pain grew like an open wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Sitting in the car, with silence filling the space around him, he realized that, despite everything, there was much more at stake. Ethan's cell phone vibrated continuously, but he ignored it. I knew Olivia would try to get in touch. He knew there would be explanations, pleas, requests for forgiveness that he wasn't willing to hear. That night had been the end of any possibility of reconciliation, and he wasn't interested in hearing her reasons. The reasons. As if any excuse could justify what she had done. The dilemma that now consumed him was something much greater. It wasn't just about ending the marriage, but how he would deal with what came next. Exposing the video publicly was a real option, and he had threatened to do so. There was a part of Ethan that wanted to see her suffer as he had, to feel the public humiliation, to be confronted by the world with the truth she had tried to hide. But at the same time, the idea of destroying her image in such a cruel way was eating him up inside. He wasn't that kind of person. Or was it? Revenge has always been a distant idea for Ethan. Throughout his life, he believed in justice, balance, right and wrong. But now, as he stared at his unlit cell phone screen, he found himself at a moral crossroads he never imagined he would face. Take the law into your own hands and destroy Olivia completely, or move on, taking with you only the pain and silence. Ethan felt that whatever he chose, he would be destroyed. There was no longer room for a life like the one before. The betrayal had changed everything. As the car drove through the dark streets, Ethan became lost in thought. What he wanted most now was to simply disappear, to escape away from that devastating reality. But the truth was that he was trapped. Not just in his pain, but in the memories of what Olivia once meant to him. The woman he loved, who he swore to protect, was now the reason for his greatest suffering. How could anyone move on after such a betrayal? Arriving home, Ethan sat in the living room, staring into space. The house they built together now seemed just a memory of what would never be again. He looked at the walls, at the photos that were still hanging, images of happy moments, vacations, parties, smiles. Each one of them seemed like a lie now. The home he and Olivia shared for so many years was nothing more than a backdrop for the sham that had been their marriage. He got up and, without thinking much, started taking the photos out of the frames. One by one, until none were left. That wasn't his life anymore. But even as he did so, doubt about his next step grew within him. The cell phone video seemed to weigh tons in his pants pocket. That was the final point. Publishing it would be the final blow, the humiliation Olivia deserved, the exposure that would destroy her reputation once and for all. But something stopped him. What would be left for him after all this? Would he still see himself in the mirror and recognize the man he once was? Or would revenge consume him completely? The following days were strange, a mix of anger and reflection. Ethan threw himself into work, trying to distract his mind with the cases at the office, but the image of Olivia with that man, the betrayal in his gestures and smiles, kept coming back. At night, he tried to sleep, but the pain kept him awake. He knew he couldn't go on like this for long. Something needed to change. It was then that he made a decision. That morning, once again sleepless, Ethan took out his cell phone, looked at the video and, before hesitating, deleted the file. Deleting the video wasn't absolution for Olivia, but it was the beginning of liberation for him. He refused to be consumed by revenge, by the need to destroy. No matter how much she had hurt him, he would not allow his life to be defined by bitterness. Ethan didn't want to be the man Olivia had molded with her betrayal. He would be someone better, someone who wouldn't give in to the darkness. Olivia tried to call countless times, left texts, and even showed up at their house, but Ethan avoided her. He knew he needed to face the pain, but not like this. She had chosen her path, and he would not be dragged along with her. Their lives were over, and there was nothing more to be said. Now, Ethan would focus on rebuilding his life, even if it meant starting from scratch. The moral dilemma that tormented him during those days had been resolved in an unexpected way. Ethan chose peace, not for Olivia, but for himself. He knew the betrayal would leave deep scars, but at least he could look forward without carrying the weight of a revenge that would destroy him as much as the betrayal. The road would still be long and painful, but he had taken the first step towards freeing himself from that dark past. Ethan and Olivia's story hadn't ended the way he had imagined when they got married, but in that moment, he accepted that some things just aren't meant to last. And in accepting that, he found a new kind of strength. The end was near, but what came next, was still a mystery he was willing to face. The months following Ethan and Olivia's final confrontation brought a quiet, inevitable change. Ethan now lived in a modest apartment, far from the home he once shared with her. The emptiness he felt inside was still there, but little by little, the silence began to turn into acceptance. The divorce process, conducted calmly and discreetly, ended without any major surprises. Olivia didn't argue, she knew that what she had done was unjustified, and any attempt to rebuild the marriage would be in vain. However, even though everything seemed calm on the surface, Ethan felt that something still tied him to the past. It was as if a part of him, even after all the decisions he had made, was still connected to that betrayal, resentment and hurt. But what he didn't know was that although he had avoided the path of public revenge, Olivia's actions had already begun to take their toll, and the retribution he had not sought would come in an unexpected way. Olivia, after the divorce, tried to continue her life. The man she had cheated on Ethan with disappeared shortly after the restaurant scandal, leaving no trace. It was a chapter closed before it even really began. Alone, Olivia found herself facing an uncertain future. At work, things quickly started to fall apart. Colleagues began to whisper, and rumors of the betrayal, despite never being publicly exposed by Ethan, spread like wildfire. The environment that was once a refuge for her became a place of judgment and disapproving looks. The reputation she cared for was tarnished, and she knew that the cause of this was her own actions. Professional consequences soon followed. The trust of her superiors declined, and Olivia was removed from her most important projects. Promotion opportunities evaporated, and before long, she was fired. The betrayal, which at first seemed like a personal decision, took on proportions that affected all areas of his life. She was isolated, without work, without the admiration of her colleagues and, most importantly, without Ethan's love. And while Olivia fell into the spiral of her own choices, Ethan took the first steps to rebuild himself. The therapy he had started shortly after the divorce began to bring clarity. The therapist helped him understand that the pain he carried was not just that of betrayal, but also that of the end of a life he had dreamed of building. He needed to let go of this idea that happiness was in the past, in the marriage he had with Olivia. Little by little, he began to open his eyes to the possibility of a new beginning. A new beginning that, ironically, came in an unexpected way. On an ordinary afternoon, while walking through the park, the same park where he and Olivia had tried to reconnect months before, Ethan ran into an old college friend, Claire. She was back in the city after spending years working abroad, and the chance meeting soon turned into a long conversation, full of memories and laughter. Claire had a lightness that Ethan hadn't seen in a long time. She reminded him of who he was before everything fell apart, before the betrayal, before all the emotional chaos. Meetings between them became frequent. Their time together was free of expectations, and Ethan, for the first time in a long time, felt free. Claire was everything Olivia wasn't: simple, genuine, and, most of all, honest. The relationship between them grew naturally, without rushing, without pressure. And, in the midst of this new love, Ethan found the peace he was looking for. As Ethan built a new life, Olivia sank deeper and deeper. Without friends, without the prestige she had at work and without a career, she moved to a small town, far from everything and everyone she knew. There was no longer any hope of returning to her old life, and, alone, she began to reflect on her choices. What she had done could not be undone. The price of betrayal was high, and she paid it with loneliness and regret. Olivia knew that her decisions had destroyed everything she had. There was no turning back. Olivia's end was a self-imposed exile, an escape from a life where she no longer found a place. Ethan, on the other hand, learned to forgive himself, to reconnect with what really mattered to him. Olivia's betrayal no longer defined him. He was not the victim of a story of infidelity, but rather someone who managed to overcome pain and find a path to redemption. His future, alongside Claire, was a new page, and he was ready to write it. The impact of the betrayal was devastating, but in the end, Ethan found something Olivia never could: peace. And with this peace came the understanding that revenge or public exposure does not always bring relief. Sometimes true power is in moving forward, in leaving the past behind, even if it has been marked by deep scars. Now, after a painful journey filled with difficult choices, Ethan was finally free. Did you like this story? Comment below what you think. We want to know your opinion about this intense journey of betrayal, pain and overcoming. Subscribe to the channel to follow more shocking stories like this. Remember, here on our channel, we do not support any type of betrayal. Our goal is to show how these acts can destroy lives and relationships.